Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager at Horner. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday live stream. Well, I'm back in the studio after a few weeks away, and I just got things kind of set up again down here. I took a lot of equipment with me to the Eclipse event, and boy, it's been a lot of fun getting all this equipment back up and going again. But I think we'll be okay for today's live stream. And I think we've got a good topic for you today. Let's take a look. Initiate file transfers from the OCS touchscreen. Now, I think this is a topic that a lot of you can utilize because when we talk about file transfers, what we're really talking about is transferring files locally between microSD and a USB flash drive or vice versa. Now, while most of us try and do all the file transfers we can these days over Ethernet using FTP or email or some other approach, this kind of old-fashioned approach of doing local file transfers still has a lot of use today, especially with those machines that aren't connected to a factory network. All right, so let's dive in and take a look at how we're going to break down today's topic. Okay, we're going to start by talking about which OCS models allow you to do local file transfers between microSD and USB. We'll talk about different applications where this is useful, the different types of files you might be transferring, for example. We'll talk about some of the key functions in Cscape and in the OCS for performing local file transfers, and we'll have plenty of demonstrations. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so which OCS models support the ability to transfer between microSD and USB flash drives? Well, it really comes down to which models can support USB flash drives, because every OCS that's made has a microSD slot. So that means the X5 and X5 Prime are good to go, the entire XL series from the XL4 on up, the XL Prime series in its entirety, and the upcoming Canvas series. However, if you're talking about the micro OCS models X2, X4, X7, or X10, the XLE and XLT with or without Ethernet, and pretty much all the RCC models, then you won't be able to use this feature, but it still applies to a lot of units. Okay, so what are some of the applications where doing local file transfers is useful? Well, of course, if you don't have Ethernet available, you don't have a local plant network that your machine is mounted on or communicating with, then this might be a method you need to take a close look at. For example, let's say from a maintenance standpoint, that you want to keep a copy of the latest program file on the local microSD card, and you're getting ready to change that out, but the file is with the maintenance guy on a USB drive. Well, if you've set up the machine to be able to copy from USB to microSD for this sort of function, then you could be good to go. Now, what about some production type data or maybe quality control type data? Maybe you've got a report that's automatically generated by the OCS. Maybe it's a weekly report or a daily report, and you want to get that transferred from microSD over to USB without opening up the control enclosure. Or let's say you have Datalog files that are used by your quality control department, and you want to get those files from microSD to USB. Those are some other applications when you might want to use this method. So lots of good applications for this method, and we'll show you how to do it today. Okay, now if you are going to be transferring files between microSD and USB, I would highly recommend that you purchase and install one of these USB extension cables that can extend access to the USB port to outside the enclosure. And most of them also maintain the IP or the NEMA rating of the enclosure. So functionally, there's no reason to open up the control enclosure. You just, unscrew the cap, plug in the drive, and then from the touchscreen, you're going to perform the functions that I'm going to show you how to use today. Okay, so when we talk about removable media, there are a lot of functions and features in the OCS that support removable media. data logging, report generation. There's also plenty of them from the system menu that are accessible, like loading programs and cloning and those sorts of things. But all of those functions that I've just mentioned either use the system menu or their own custom dialog box to configure. What about this copy capability that I'm talking about today? Well, in that scenario, you need to use one of the removable media function blocks that's available in the instruction set in Cscape, specifically the copy block. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so the copy function block that's available in Cscape is really pretty straightforward. It doesn't have a lot of inputs and outputs. The only input is the source, which is typically the file name or series of file names that you're going to be copying. The destination is where you want to put those files, or it could be just a single file. And then you also have a status register or status variable that you can assign that tells you if you were successful or not, and if not, will give you a clue as to why not. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and that is this: when you fill out the source and destination fields in this function block, you can either enter the data in directly between single quotes, so the exact file name and path on the source side and the exact path on the destination side, again, all between single quotes, or you can use variables instead. Now, if you use variables for source or destination or both, then for variable-based advanced ladder, that means byte arrays, so byte array type variables. If you're talking about register-based ladder, then those are just going to be register references, which can contain up to 2 characters per 16-bit register. So if you had a string of 10 consecutive registers, that would give you the ability to handle a string with up to 20 characters long. Okay, so let's give a simple example here of copying a program file from the USB drive over to the microSD card. Now, you can load programs from the USB card. That is possible, but it's always good to have a copy of the microSD card inside the main microSD drive of the controller, and a lot of times you really want to load it from that drive anyway. The microSD cards typically, they're more reliable, and of course, if they're not accessible from the outside of the panel, they're more likely to actually be in there. All right, so let's take a look at this example where we have typed in directly the paths for the source and the destination. So our source is, as you can see there, b:/default.pgm, all between single quotes. So it's a specific file name that we've specified for the program that we're going to be copying. And B indicates that we're talking about the USB drive. Now we're going to copy that to A:, between single quotes, and that represents the microSD drive. Now, if you leave off the drive letter, then it's going to default to microSD. So just be aware of that. And then of course, from a status standpoint, I assigned a status variable called program copy status, which is just a 16-bit integer, and we'll go into detail on that here in a minute. So this is the example where you type everything in between single quotes verbosely without variables. Now, similarly, you might want to actually specify variables for your source or your destination. So in this scenario, if you're using variable-based advanced ladder, then of course we're talking about byte arrays for both the source and the destination in this particular case. Now, one thing to keep in mind, whether you type in the information verbosely in between single quotes or whether you have variables that you're using in your filling out of these copy blocks, you can use wildcards within the file names and the paths. So they're the same file names that are available in the old DOS. You can use the star and the question mark. And I've got examples there on the screen showing you how you could use those. So star.star would specify a whole group of files that you might want to copy. And then a series of question marks followed by .csv, for instance, could indicate a file name of a certain length with .csv as its type, as far as wildcard specifications go. So you do have some flexibility, whether you're typing it in manually between quotes or whether you're using those characters within your file names. Okay, and of course, let's now dive into that status that you get back from the copy block that tells you if things went properly or not. If you're getting a -4, it means the function block has not been enabled. In other words, it doesn't have power coming into it. If you get a value of 0 with your status register, all is good. It indicates success. Value of -2 or -3 means we need to wait a little bit longer for it to complete. and all the other values are errors. And as you can see, there's quite a number of them that could occur. Although, if you've set everything up properly and the drives are both installed, then generally once you get everything debugged from a development standpoint, you should be good to go. Now, another function or feature that is very useful in this scenario we're talking about today is the Removable Media Manager graphical object. Now, it's absolutely not required for the functionality we're talking about today, which is to copy files from, USB to microSD and vice versa. But it can be handy, especially for maintenance folks where you have a little more trust in them kind of taking a look at the files that are actually housed or contained within the USB or the microSD drive. So what the Removable Media Object does is it gives you the ability, when you're just looking at it on the screen as a button, to see at a glance, based on the color, that both the microSD card and the USB drive are installed, because in that case the buttons will be green, and as long as they're not full or anything, again, they'll remain green. Now, if somebody pulled the USB drive, or for some reason it wasn't recognized when it was plugged in, then you won't get a green color on the USB removable media object that I have configured here in our example. So it's a very useful function when just looking or glancing at the screen. And then if you want to take a look at the details of the files that are contained on the individual drives, then you can do that. And by pressing the button, the operator can press the button and see a listing of the files and the directories. They also have the ability potentially to do things like deleting files, changing directories, loading programs, all those sorts of things. But if those things sound scary and dangerous, you do, as the system designer, have the ability to only enable the functions you want the operator to have. Okay, so restricting functions is not a problem. And we're going to show you, as part of our example today, the removable media object that I did put on our example screens. And you can, of course, as always, you can download my examples from our website and check it out yourself in person. Okay, so let's get started by showing you how to transfer a PGM file from USB to microSD. All right, so let's head into Cscape first, all right, and take a look at that. Okay, so here we are in Cscape. And let me go ahead and show you the little bit of code that I have developed. Well, before we do that, let's take a look at the screen that I've developed. That might be a little more informative to start. Okay, so we've got here a push button that the operator is going to press to initiate the transfer of the file from USB to microSD. Now, if it's successful, they'll see a success light turn on here. If it's unsuccessful, they'll see a fail light turn on. And then briefly at least, and this is really here just for demonstration purposes, but briefly at least, they'll also see the status. Or they might, if there's a problem, they may see the status stay in this particular field. And then if they want to, take a look at the individual files within the USB or the microSD, they can do that using these objects. Now let me double click on one of these objects here just to show you. This is the one that's supposed to take a look at the USB file. Notice I have configured the B drive as the starting directory. That's how we specify the USB drive. And then for microSD, if we specify nothing or A: instead, we'll get the microSD details, or the operator will get the microSD details instead. Okay, so that's what the screen looks like. Now, what does our function look like in ladder, and how do we kick it off? Well, when we push our push button here, we're going to turn on a set bit, which will keep the copy block active as long as it needs to be to execute the function. So it's always better not to use things like one-shots and momentaries to enable a copy removable media function block, because you want it to execute to completion. Okay, so the source is a specific file name here, and the destination is just the A drive, because we're copying this specific file from USB to A, and then here's our status variable. All right, and then we've got a couple things we're looking at to see if things succeeded or not. So while we're in the middle of copying, If we get a 0, it means, okay, we're good. So we set the OK bit and we clear our execute bit, okay? However, if we don't get a 0 and we don't get a -2 or a -3, which tells us we need to wait a little longer, we know we have an error. So we set the error flag and again, turn off the execute button. And then we have a clear push button that we can press to clear the status of everything so we can do another transfer if we need to. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the unit on the bench. Okay, so here we go. Here's the unit on the bench, ready to go. You can see a status of -4 that indicates that the function block is not enabled. Now, in this case, we're going to copy a default.pgm from USB to microSD. So let's make sure that file is in there. Sure enough, it is. Okay. And on the microSD drive, it's not there. Okay, so in this case, it's not there yet. We execute the copy by pressing that button. We get success very quickly. Okay, and let's go into the microSD directory and verify that file is actually there. There it is. So you can see that was very painless. Now, what would happen if we were to copy that again? Let's say that there was already a default.pgm file on the microSD card and we do another copy. So maybe that one represents an older version of the program or something. What would happen here? Would it fail or would it overwrite it? Well, first we need to clear the previous operation so we can do another one. Okay, now I've executed another one and you can see success. So indeed, it will overwrite that file if it already exists in the destination. So that's something always to keep in mind when you're crafting these sort of operations here. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. Copying a file from USB to microSD, and in this case, we just typed in the details directly between single quotes. All right, let's head back to our content and let's move on to the next subject. Okay, so let's do something a little more complex next, because that last thing was just too easy. I got to challenge you guys a little bit more. Okay, let's say in this next example that we're going to be moving some Datalog files from microSD over to USB. So let's do a really quick review of Datalog files. So Datalog files are stored on a folder in the microSD that's equivalent to the name of the Datalog group. So if you create a Datalog group called process data, for instance, then those Datalog files that are created are all going to be within a folder called process data. Now, the name of the files themselves, okay, are going to vary depending on how the Datalog has been set up. Okay, so if you've set up a Datalog so that you're logging variables on a periodic basis, let's say every second or every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds, so in terms of seconds, then what's going to happen is the files will be automatically named after the month, date, and hour in which it was created. And at the top of every hour, a new file will be created, again, with that file name, which of course is going to change based on the real-time clock. Now, let's say instead that you have a Datalog file where the variables are logged in terms of minutes. Or maybe you have a Datalog file where they're only logged upon a trigger, whenever a bit turns on. Well, in those cases, the file name is based on year, month, day, and you only get one new file per day. Okay, so that is the way that Datalog files are named and how often they're created. And why is that important? Well, if we're going to be copying those files selectively, not just all of them at once with like a star.star wildcard or something, but if we're going to be copying them selectively, then we need to understand how the Datalog file names are built so that we can properly fill out the source path so that we can get the file that we want or the files that we want copied over to USB. So in our example, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be selectively copying over Datalog files, not just all of them all at once. Okay, so let's move on to our next demonstration. Back to Cscape. This time I'm going to go to a different section of my program. And once again, let's start out in the graphics section. I'll move to a second screen here. So in this case, it's very similar to our previous example in terms of the controls that are on the screen, except first, the operator will select the month, date, and year for the Datalog files that they want to copy. Okay, it could have been for 3 days ago, could be for today, whatever the case may be. And then just like before, they're going to hit a Start Copy button. They're going to get some feedback whether it works or not. If it doesn't work, in this case, we're copying 2 sets of files because I'm going to show you my Datalog configuration here in a minute, and there are 2 different Datalogs that are going on right now. So if we have a problem with the first one or a problem with the second one, we'll also get an error flag here. And then for purely diagnostic purposes and for purely, I guess, educational purposes, I've shown on the screen here the path and destination so that we can kind of see what we're going to be building based on the time and date that has been specified to be copied. You can see the path and destination that we've built, again, for educational purposes primarily. All right, so that's what's going on the screen. Now let's take a look at the Datalog configuration. So I'm going to go under Program, Datalog Config. And what I have here is 2 different Datalogs, 2 different Datalog groups. The first one, okay, is being logged every second. Okay, so its file name is going to be based on down to the hour, as we mentioned on that last slide. I always have a hard time remembering that myself. Actually, let's do this. Let's go back and take a look at it just so that I can give you the exact right information. Okay, so when our intervals in seconds, our file name is based on month, date, hour. There we go. Had to double check on that. Okay, and then our other Datalog is triggered only. So if we take a look at that one, it's only going to be sampling the variables whenever it's triggered. So that one is just going to have 1 new file per day. All right, so we know the names of the groups is going to effectively correlate to the folder in which the files are contained, and we know the names of the folders are going to be built on the real-time clock. All right, so now let's go into our logic. Now, frankly, most of the logic in this example is really all about building the file names that need to be copied. Because remember, this is selectable. We are selecting a particular date for which we're going to copy all the Datalog files from. If we just wanted to copy all of them, we could just type it in manually as we would type in the path as the specific folder with star.star as part of the path, and then it would copy all the files. But we may not want to do that, and in this example, we're not doing that. Okay, so we start out by building the source file name and path here. Okay, now this is the source, this is the directory that the files are all going to be contained in, and then I've put dummy characters here for where the month, date, and hour will be filled in later in the logic. Okay, so this is the source code, if you will, or the source for where the files are coming from. And then this is the destination for the files, again, in the case of the first Datalog group. All right, and again, you can see we're just specifying a folder name here, okay, called test data. All right, and then similarly, all right, we're building the first part of the path and file name for the triggered type Datalog, and then the destination for the triggered as well, the folder in which it's going to be contained. All right. Now, we've kind of built the first part of the source and destination, and then once the copy button is pressed, then we need to fill in the rest of the details of the source file name based on the month and date in the case of the files that are created hourly, and based on the year, month, and date for the Datalog files that are created daily. Okay, so based on the real-time clock, that date is filled in there. We move the characters over to the right location, and then one key thing here, in the case of the files that are created every hour, where we could be copying multiple files, we're putting a star.csv at the end so that we'll get all the files that effectively meet that criteria that we've set up in our file name, and that'll become clearer once I show you the screen. Okay, so we finished building the file names for sources and destinations, and then we just perform the copies in sequence. We copy the hourly data first. Once that's done and successful, we copy the daily data from there, and then we are done. Okay, so that's what the logic looks like. Now let's head to the bench and take a look at it on the bench, because I think some of the details will become more clear once you see that path called out on the screen. Okay, so I've switched to this particular screen. The target date in terms of the files that are going to be copied are specified there as today's date, 4/23/24. It could very easily be for a previous date just by changing those values there. Okay, and you can see I've had a previous copy that I've done. Let's take a look in the lower right-hand corner at the source path and destination. And that's where you can see in the source path especially that what we're doing for the first copy is we're copying everything in the test data folder that starts with 0423 and ends with .csv. So we're only going to be copying the files from today. Those will be the only ones that are copied. Whereas on the bottom, we're specifying the second copy, we're specifying the entire file name, which is 240423.csv, of course, housed within that folder as well. And then the destinations there are shown on the right. Okay, so I'm going to need to go ahead and clear the previous test write that I did. Let's go take a look and see what's on the microSD drive. And you can see that our test data and trig data folders are there with data inside them that can be copied. And then if we take a look at the USB drive, you can see that there are no such folders there. Okay, they have not been copied. So let's see if we can execute this copy and make it work. Okay, so it looks like it worked. Let's go to the USB drive and make sure everything's there. Okay, so the folders were written. That's what we're looking for. Let's start with test data. Okay, there's test data. Oh, I got to find the enter key there. And you can see we copied 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 files as part of that one copy instruction because of the star.csv that was part of our source. Okay. Whereas trig data is just a single file. We called out the entire file name and we copied that file. Okay, so that is basically our examples on how to do local file copies using the copy removable media function in Cscape. Okay, so that is our material for today. So this is where I remind you we're here every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, whether we're fully live like today, or whether we are pre-recorded because of my schedule or some other reason. But we've always got folks standing by if you're watching live to answer your questions in the chat section. And if you're watching on replay, give us those questions and comments in the comment section and we'll get back to you just as soon as we can. Okay, don't forget to sign up for Horner Training. They do fill up relatively fast. We still have openings for all these courses though, but don't delay. If you'd like to interact with us online, you can do so in a lot of different ways, either on our website, our YouTube channel, or on LinkedIn. We're looking forward to connecting with you soon. Okay, now, we do have a video next week, so I'll tell you about that in a minute. But first, I want to tell you about our live show from Automate 2024, which is in Chicago this year, 2 weeks from tomorrow. Okay, so it's going to be on a Wednesday. Now we're doing it fully live. We paid for internet access, which is no small feat. So we're fully expecting to have enough bandwidth to be able to broadcast live from Hanover, not Hanover, from Automate. That would be a real trick to fly over to Germany and broadcast from there. But anyway, we will be broadcasting fully live 2 weeks from tomorrow from the Automate show. Should be a lot of fun, and you're going to have an opportunity to see products you've never seen before. Not just the ones we have previewed before, like Canvas and Cscape 10, but ones that you absolutely have not seen before. So don't miss it. Okay, next week we do have a video, and we will be having a topic where we expand the Horner OCS using SmartMod.io. Now, SmartMod is not necessarily a topic that we've covered on this channel before. I realized that a few weeks ago, so I thought we better get a topic added to our live stream series because we do have quite a few people that use SmartMod. Okay, Now, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, don't hesitate to do so. It doesn't cost anything. And if you choose notifications when you subscribe, you'll be notified every time we go live, like at Automate in 2 weeks from tomorrow. So you'll get a notification if you've subscribed and chose notifications, again, every time we go live or every time we post a new video. So until next week when we talk smart mod, let's all get out there and do us some good.